Vulnerability. Lots of people, they have reservations around this topic. They often consider vulnerability, in fact, as a form of weakness. They believe the whole thing is some hippie, feel-good, woo-woo shit, and they often equate it with pleading for acceptance and hand-holding and dancing around a campfire at this self-help seminar that you paid way too much for, or they think of it as reciting how you love yourself in front of a mirror 50 times every morning. Valid points. However, real vulnerability, the kind of vulnerability I want to present in this video, has nothing to do with these cringy things. Real vulnerability is actually far simpler, more mundane, yet way more powerful than all the preconceived wishy-washy notions people have around it. And it's also backed by large-scale, highly funded studies, has heaps of empirical data, and countless titans researching it and confirming that, hey, vulnerability, it actually works. It's actually really effective. Now, to be specific, when done right, vulnerability builds intimacy and trust. It removes ambiguity in gameplay. It creates sexual tension. It improves self-esteem. And usually, it demonstrates confidence and courage. It also torches neediness, implies to you, the one being vulnerable, that you are of equal status and importance than your ex, and it reinforces this very healthy and empowering idea that you are worthy, that you are adequate, and that you should feel that way. Now, as you'd guess, for all of these reasons combined, I am convinced vulnerability is the best and only proper means of reattraction. It's the one thing that should permeate across all interactions you have with your ex, and I like to think about it as the key to rekindling your relationship. In fact, I would even argue vulnerability, true vulnerability, is the key to healthy relationships in general. So that's how important I believe this concept is. Now, what really is vulnerability? Let's start from the beginning and move up or build up from there. In a nutshell, it just means expressing your thoughts, your desires, and your emotions while staying unguarded and undefended and not expecting a particular response in return. When you're vulnerable, you're essentially communicating, this is who I am, take it or leave it. In a way, you are sticking your neck out emotionally and putting yourself into a position where you can be hurt. Yes, you've heard that right. Real vulnerability is risky, it's uncomfortable, and it often has tangible consequences. You may piss off your ex, you may turn them off, you may destroy your chances of ever getting them back. But the key is to accept those consequences. Because look, if you're lucky enough to mend your relationship while being truly vulnerable, the odds of making it healthy and lasting, they skyrocket. That said, there are some mistakes people make with vulnerability that are worth pointing out. Basically, the mistakes are as follows: using vulnerability as just another tactic, or simply understanding it as this torrent of unrestrained and excessive emotions. Well, let me unpack these two mistakes, okay? First of all, vulnerability being a tactic. So what I mean by this is that some people, they think that sharing something awkward or personal with their ex will make their ex love or like them more. Truth is, this approach is inauthentic, it's needy, and ultimately unattractive. Because true vulnerability means expressing yourself genuinely, without any expectations or conditions. For example, sharing a personal story should be about genuine sharing of that personal story. It shouldn't be about manipulating someone's feelings. As for the second mistake people make, emotional overload. This is a funny one. Basically, people think vulnerability is overwhelming your ex with intense emotions. For instance, bombarding them with declarations of undying love or all your insecurities and all that muck that you're holding on and you just want to unload on your ex. This is vulnerability, sure, but it's an unhealthy, off-putting kind of vulnerability. It's kind of the equivalent of oversharing, and that can very well make you appear desperate, and it does not really lead to getting your ex to like you more. It usually just smothers them. You see, true vulnerability, it requires balance. Sharing honestly and openly while respecting both your dignity and your ex's emotional space. So keep note of that. Now let's get into the more practical side of things. How can you be actually more vulnerable? And look, first of all, to get the obvious out of the way, I get that vulnerability, it's kind of an abstract topic, and that many people have difficulty understanding it, even after watching a video like this about what it is. So let me put forward a couple of examples, simple, short examples, of what vulnerability actually looks like in the real world in the context of reattraction, aka trying to rekindle a relationship, so you can have a better idea of how to practice it. So for example, confessing how you still love your ex and want them back. That's an example of vulnerability. So is admitting your mistakes and how you would avoid repeating them. Mistakes, that is, relating to your breakup. Another instance of vulnerability would be when you acknowledge how your ex's actions have hurt you and you actually admit that you are in pain. Same for sharing a painful personal story that relates to the one your ex shared. Asserting your boundaries and standing up for what you believe in, that's also vulnerability. And so is calling your ex out on their bullshit if they disrespect you. Even apologizing to your ex for something that you've done because you genuinely regret it, that's also vulnerability. And finally, our last example, simply telling your ex that you're nervous when you are about to have sex, that's also vulnerability. Now, even though these examples, they feel like behavioral prescriptions, they're not. I'm not telling you to do something here, I am telling you to be something. Because vulnerability, as I said or alluded to earlier, it's not about doing, it's about being. Now, the last thing I want to mention when it comes to this subject is what's called the pain period. So if you faked who you are for, let's say, months or years, and you just recently started being vulnerable, you can expect your ex to react unfavorably or negatively for a time. You could even expect a swift and perhaps permanent rejection. But look, what other choice do you really have? You can continue hiding your emotional baggage and limit the emotional connection and trust and intimacy you can develop with your ex, or you can begin airing out that baggage, dealing with the embarrassing repercussions, disapproval, and hopefully only temporary rejection. It's not fun, it sucks in fact, but it's the necessary evil. And sure, you don't have to technically deal with your emotional baggage with only your ex. You can work through that muck by sharing it with friends, family, or a therapist. But there will always be some issues that can only be dealt with, perhaps resolved, while you're interacting with your ex, particularly issues revolving around inferiority and intimacy. So go out there, start being vulnerable, begin today, and you'll slowly become comfortable with the whole thing. You'll grow sooner or later unattached to it, and then it will start to feel like second nature. Even better, once you pop out of the other side of this pain period, you will become a far more attractive, confident, and self-accepting person. A person capable of finding new layers of depth and meaning in their relationships. In all of their relationships. That's all from my side. If you want to go deeper into my process for getting an ex back, download my reattraction cheat sheet, link in the description down below this video. And with that out of the way, I will see you later.